In 1822, on a sugar estate in British Guiana, an overseer drank from a metal cup beside the mill and collapsed before sunset. The plantation called it fever. The doctor suspected poison, but no one found the vial, no one found the plant, and no one understood why one quiet woman kept watching that cup as if it had already become a grave. British Guiana, 1822. The Harrogate estate stood between cane fields and mangrove water, in a colony where sugar was counted more carefully than human life. The mill ran from before sunrise until the light failed. The boiling house burned through the day. The cane carts rolled in with split wheels, broken axles, and bodies pushed past exhaustion. Every sound on that estate served the same economy. Iron turning, water slapping wood, cane cracking under rollers, overseers calling names, and people answering because silence was dangerous and refusal could be fatal. The owner's house sat above the yard with white shutters and a clean veranda. Below it were the work sheds, the boiling house, the wash house, the kitchen yard, and the quarters. It was a system arranged like evidence. Comfort at the top, labor below, punishment everywhere in between. When someone died, the record rarely carried the truth. A fall became carelessness. Exhaustion became weakness. A beating became correction. A disappearance became escape. The paper did not need to lie loudly. It only had to leave out what mattered. That is how places like Harrogate survived. Not by hiding cruelty completely, but by teaching everyone which crimes were allowed to have official names. Nyra Akande understood this before she was old enough to say it clearly. She was 32 years old, assigned between the kitchen yard and the boiling house, trusted with heat, water, herbs, scraps, and silence. Trust, on Harrogate, did not mean respect. It meant the powerful had mistaken her quietness for surrender. Nyra did not waste movement. She watched before she acted. She knew which hinge squealed near the washhouse door. She knew which guard drank before midnight. She knew when the owner's wife sent plates back untouched and when the cook hid food for the field hands. She knew the sound of Garrick Hove's boots before she saw him. That knowledge was not gossip. It was survival. Garrick Hove was the overseer of Harrogate, a man in his 40s with a hard face and a talent for making fear look like order. He was not clever in the way educated men admired. He did not need to be. He had authority, a whip, keys, and the protection of a world built to excuse him before he acted. He liked routine. That mattered. Every morning, Garrick crossed the yard before the sun climbed high. He checked the mill, cursed the cart drivers, inspected the boiling house, and stopped beside a post near the sugar mill. On that post hung his private metal cup. He filled it with cane, liquor, and sweet juice, drank from it through the day, and dared anyone to touch what belonged to him. People noticed the cup because Garrick wanted them to notice it. It was not just a drinking vessel. It was a small public throne. His hand reached for it, and the yard made room. Nyra noticed it differently. She noticed when he drank. How much? With which hand? Whether he wiped the rim. Whether he left it covered. Whether anyone else ever came near it. At first, these details meant nothing except habit. Then her brother saw something he was not supposed to see. Nyra Akande was 29, a mill repairman with strong hands and a dangerous habit of looking men in the eye. He understood iron better than most white mechanics on the estate. He could hear when a gear was about to fail. He could feel through the handle of a tool when a wheel had shifted out of line. That skill should have protected him. On Harrogate, skill only made an enslaved man more useful. It did not make him safe. Nyra was careful around Garrick, but never broken. That was the problem. There were men who obeyed and still kept something inside them untouched. Garrick could sense it. Men like him always could. Nyra warned her brother more than once. "Lower your eyes," she told him near the kitchen wall one evening. Nyra did not answer at first. He looked toward the washhouse, where a locked side room stood behind stacked barrels and wet linen. Then he said, "You know why that door stays locked?" Nyra looked away. Not because she did not care, because on Harrogate, knowing too much could become a sentence. Nyra leaned closer. "He takes them there after dark." That was all he said. He did not need to explain who he was. Nyra's face did not change. Her hands kept working. She was cutting cassava into rough pieces, one slice after another, blade against wood. "Do not follow him," she said. "I already did." The knife stopped. A cart rolled somewhere in the yard. From the boiling house came the heavy cough of steam. Nyra looked at her brother then, really looked at him, and saw what he had been carrying. Not fear, but decision. He had seen Garrick lead women from the laundry quarters after nightfall. Adult women. Tired women. Women who came back silent the next morning and worked as if their bodies had been returned to them but not their peace. Demba had started asking questions carefully. Too carefully, maybe. He had also started stitching strange marks into a burial cloth he kept hidden beneath loose boards near the mill shed. Nyra found him with it once. The cloth was plain, rough, and unfinished. Along one edge ran uneven lines, knots, breaks, and dark threads. To anyone else, it looked like poor sewing. To Demba, it was a root. He had been listening to men who traded whispers with the mangrove runaways. He had learned where the ground held firm, where dogs lost scent in black water, where the patrols stopped because they feared fever more than they valued pursuit. Nyra stared at the cloth. "You are planning to run," she said. Demba folded it once, slowly. "I am planning for the day we have no choice." That answer was worse, because it meant he already believed the day was coming. For a time, nothing happened. That was how terror worked on Harrogate. It did not always announce itself. It gathered. It watched. It waited for a small mistake it could turn into a public lesson. Garrick began circling Demba more often. He came to the mill when Demba worked. He asked questions he already knew the answers to. He stood too close. He smiled without warmth. A week later, the mill jammed before noon. The cane rollers locked with a grinding sound that cut through the yard. Workers stopped. Steam hissed. The driver shouted for Demba. Demba came with his tools and opened the side panel. He found worn iron teeth inside the mechanism. The part had been failing for months. Anyone who understood machinery could see it. Garrick arrived before Demba could speak. "What did you do?" he asked. Demba stayed kneeling beside the opened mill. "The gear is worn." Garrick looked at the stopped rollers, then at the silent yard. "You broke it." Demba stood. "No." One word. Quiet, clear, fatal. The yard tightened around him. Nyra was near the boiling house carrying water. She heard the word and turned before she understood what her body already knew. Garrick stepped closer. "Say you broke it." Demba did not move. "It failed because you ignored it," he said. That was the moment Harrogate chose its record. The owner would later call it a disciplinary incident. The overseer would call it insolence. The plantation book would reduce it to work-related misfortune. But the truth was simpler. Demba had seen a locked room. He had asked dangerous questions. He had refused to accept a lie in public, so Garrick made his death useful. The punishment happened in the yard, in front of the mill, in front of the people who needed to understand the cost of dignity. Nyra tried to reach him. Two women caught her arms. One whispered her name once, not to comfort her, but to keep her alive. Demba fell before the lesson was over. No doctor was called for him first. No owner came down in alarm. No bell rang for justice. He was carried to the quarters with breath still in him, and no authority willing to name what had been done. Nyra washed his face after dark. His eyes did not open. His hand twitched once when she spoke his name. Before dawn, he was gone. The burial cloth was brought out because there was nothing else clean enough. Only then did Nyra see the stitches again. Knots, lines, broken threads, marks that looked careless until grief forced her to remember Demba's words. A route. A map hidden in the one object no overseer would study closely, because men like Garrick did not believe the dead could give directions. Demba was buried before the heat rose. By noon, the mill was running again. That was the plantation's answer to murder. Restart the machine, replace the hand, clean the yard, write the lie. Nyra returned to work the next day. Her face was empty. Her voice was smaller. People thought grief had hollowed her out. They were wrong. Grief had made room. She began with Garrick's boots. then his keys, then the cup. She watched the cup beside the mill until she knew its place better than prayer. If you're listening from Guyana, Jamaica, South Carolina, Louisiana, Brazil, Ghana, London, New York, or any place where buried histories still have a voice, comment your city below. Let this story know where it has reached tonight, because the people who built these worlds were denied witnesses in life. The least we can do now is refuse to be silent. After Demba was buried, Harrogate did what plantations were designed to do. It absorbed the crime. The yard was swept. The mill was repaired. The blood-darkened soil near the rollers was covered with fresh cane waste. The owner did not call a magistrate. Garrick Hove did not lose authority. No apology was spoken, not even the false kind powerful men use when they want silence without consequence. By the second morning, the estate had returned to its ordinary violence. That return was the accusation. It proved that Demba's death had not been an interruption. It had been part of the machinery. Nyra understood this with a clarity that did not feel like grief anymore. Grief had been hot at first, then hollow. Now it had become organized. It sat behind her eyes and counted. She did not change her routine. That was the first rule. A woman who suddenly moved differently would be noticed. A woman who asked questions would be watched. A woman whose brother had just been killed by the overseer had to appear broken enough to be harmless. So Nyra became exactly what Harrogate expected to see. She kept her head low. She spoke less than before. She carried water. She cleaned iron pots. She worked near the boiling house with the same deadened precision that made others look away out of pity. When people tried to comfort her, she nodded without answering. When Garrick passed, she stepped aside. He mistook it for defeat. That mistake gave her room. She began with his day. Garrick woke before dawn in the overseer's quarters, not from discipline, but from suspicion. Men like him feared stillness. They slept lightly because they knew what they had done to the people around them. At first light, he crossed the yard, checked the doors, counted tools, then stood near the mill while the first carts arrived. He drank before breakfast. Not enough to stagger, enough to steady the cruelty in him. He kept the metal cup beside the mill because he trusted habit more than people. It was dented near the rim, darkened by years of liquor, and fitted with a loose lid that never closed properly. No one touched it. No one needed to be told not to touch it. Ownership on Harrogate was enforced by memory. Nyra watched from the kitchen path. Morning, cup filled. Midday, cup refilled. Late afternoon, cup taken back. He drank more when the heat was high. He drank faster after speaking with the owner. He drank deepest after visiting the washhouse. That detail stayed with her. The washhouse had always been part of the estate's daily labor, a damp building behind the main yard where linen, work shirts, sacks, and cloths were washed, beaten, wrung, and hung. It smelled of soap, sweat, standing water, and ash. Women worked there, bent over tubs until their hands cracked. Behind it was the locked side room. Demba had named it before he died. Nyra did not go near it at first. Revenge required patience, and patience required not satisfying every hunger at once. She already knew enough to understand Garrick was protecting something there. She did not yet know whether that secret could help her kill him or destroy her before she tried. On the fifth night after Demba's burial, she saw Salome Ebo leave the washhouse after dark. Salome was 36, strong-shouldered, quiet in a way different from Nyra. Nyra's silence watched outward. Salome's silence seemed built around something sealed inside. She carried a bundle of wet cloth against her chest and walked without lifting her eyes. Garrick came out after her. He locked the side room, put the key in his coat, stood for a moment in the yard as if daring the darkness to speak. Then he went to his quarters. Nyra saw all of it from behind stacked cane baskets near the kitchen wall. She did not move until he was gone. The next morning, she looked at Salome's hands, red at the knuckles, torn near the thumb. Not unusual for washhouse work. That was the protection cruelty had on Harrogate. Every injury could be explained by labor. Nyra said nothing. Salome said nothing. But now Demba's warning had weight. Nyra needed a weapon that could not be traced to anger. A knife would fail. Fire would call men with guns. A public attack would punish everyone in the quarters before the sun came up. Even a rumor would be enough to get her dragged to the big house and questioned until her silence cracked. Garrick had to die in a way the estate could explain to itself. The colony already had the explanation ready. Fever, bad water, rotten meat, swamp sickness. The same white men who denied cruelty were quick to blame the climate. Nyra's mother had understood plants. Not in the way doctors wrote in books, but in the way women kept people alive when no doctor came. Root for swelling, bark for stomach pain, leaves for fever, seeds that calmed, sap that burned, and other things never spoken about near walls. Nyra remembered one plant in particular, sleep root. It grew where the mangrove mud turned black and the ground stayed wet beneath shade. Its leaves were narrow and dark, with pale veins like thin scars. Used wrongly, it could twist the stomach, weaken the limbs, confuse the breath, and leave behind symptoms that looked close enough to fever for a careless doctor to accept. Nyra had never used it that way, but Harrogate had already used every lawful thing against her. That night, after the quarters settled into exhausted sleep, Nyra slipped out. She waited first. Waiting was not hesitation. Waiting was how she stayed alive. One guard passed near the cattle pen. Another coughed behind the storage shed. A dog lifted its head, sniffed, then settled again. Nyra moved only when the yard forgot her. She crossed behind the kitchen, then past the refuse pit, then down toward the low wet ground where the estate met the mangrove edge. The dark there was thick, but she knew the path by pressure underfoot. Dry ridge, soft dip, exposed root, broken plank over standing water. She carried no lantern. A lantern would help her see and help others see her. She preferred the dark. Near the first mangrove channel, she crouched and searched by touch. Mud pressed between her fingers. Mosquitoes cut at her wrists. Twice she found the wrong plant and left it. The third time, her thumb felt the narrow leaf, the raised vein, the stem that bent before it broke. Sleep root. She did not pull it barehanded. She used a strip of old cloth and folded the leaves into it carefully. Then more. Not too much. Too much would announce itself. Too little would leave Garrick breathing. That was the kind of calculation Harrogate had forced into her hands. Not whether killing was clean, only whether it would work. Back in the quarters, she hid the leaves beneath a loose patch of packed earth under her sleeping mat. She lay down before dawn and did not sleep. Around her, people breathed heavily, turned in dreams, whispered names of the living and the dead. At sunrise, Nyra rose with the others. She worked the full day with poison beneath her bed. For 3 nights, she prepared it. She crushed the leaves between 2 stones when the quarters were loud enough to cover the sound. She mixed the dark pulp with a small amount of boiled water stolen from the kitchen. She strained it through cloth until the liquid thinned into something that could disappear inside cane liquor. The smell worried her. Bitter, green, sharp. So she tested it against the things Garrick already drank. Cane liquor could hide almost anything if the cup was dirty, and the man drinking from it trusted his own power more than his senses. On the 4th morning, she carried the vial in the fold of her skirt. The yard was busy. Carts came in late. Men shouted near the mill. Garrick had already filled his cup and left it on the post. Nyra walked toward it. Not fast. Fast would be guilt. She moved with a small basket against her hip, as if sent to collect peelings near the boiling house. The cup was 10 steps away. Then 6. Then 3. A driver crossed suddenly with a broken harness in his hand. Nyra turned aside and bent near the ground, pretending to gather spilled cane strips. The driver stopped beside the post. He called to another man. For nearly a minute, he stood close enough to touch Garrick's cup. Nyra's fingers tightened around the vial beneath her skirt. The driver moved on. She stepped forward again. Then Garrick appeared from the mill shed. No warning, no shout, just boots on packed earth. Nyra lowered her head at once and turned away. Garrick walked past her, took the cup, drank, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked across the yard with irritation. Clean drink, clean chance lost. Nyra kept walking. Inside, her body was shaking hard enough to make each step feel separate from the next. She reached the kitchen yard, set down the basket, and gripped the edge of a table until the tremor passed. She had imagined courage would feel like fire. It felt like sickness. For the rest of the day, she could not stop seeing the cup. Garrick drank from it again and again. Alive, untouched, continuing. That night, she took the vial out and stared at it in the dark. She thought of Demba's face after they carried him in. She thought of the burial cloth. She thought of Salome leaving the wash house with torn hands. She thought of the locked room. Then she buried the vial again. Not because she had forgiven Garrick, because the first attempt had taught her something important. The cup was not enough. She needed confusion, a crowd, noise, a reason to be near the post longer than a passing step, and she needed her hands to stop shaking before she tried again. For 7 days, Nyra did not act. She watched. She learned the estate's rhythm after rain, after delayed carts, after a jammed mill, after the owner's temper rose. She learned when everyone looked toward the cane road and when no one looked at the post. On the 8th day, 3 carts arrived together with split bundles spilling into the yard. Men shouted. Cane fell. The mill foreman cursed. Garrick stormed toward the road to blame someone before the owner could blame him. His cup remained on the post. Nyra saw the opening. This time, she did not hurry. She lifted a coil of rope, crossed the yard, and stopped beside the post as if clearing spilled cane from underfoot. Her body bent. Her left hand steadied the cup. Her right hand opened the vial. The liquid went in without sound. She closed the lid. She lifted the rope. She walked away. No one shouted. No one pointed. No one saw the moment justice entered Garrick Hove's cup wearing the face of fever. For several minutes after Nyra walked away from the post, nothing in Harrogate changed. That was the first punishment of waiting. The mill kept turning. Cane disappeared between iron rollers. Men pushed carts forward. Women crossed the yard carrying water, cloth, ash, and orders that were never written down because everyone already knew who had power and who paid for disobedience. Garrick Hove stood near the cane road, shouting at 2 drivers over a broken cart pin. His cup sat where he had left it, under the loose lid, the poison already mixed into liquor and sweet cane juice. Nyra did not look at it directly. Looking too often was how guilt announced itself. She kept to the boiling house, lifting buckets, scraping residue from the rim of a copper pan, moving through heat so thick it made the lungs work harder. Every action had to be ordinary. Every breath had to be controlled. The body, when frightened, wants to confess before the mouth does. A hand shakes. A glance returns. A step slows at the wrong time. Nyra forced herself into labor. Across the yard, Garrick finished, blaming the drivers. He struck the side of the broken cart with his boot, turned back toward the mill, and reached for the cup. Nyra saw it only from the edge of her vision. He drank. Once. A long swallow. Then he lowered the cup, wiped his mouth, and went on shouting. No collapse. No change. No sign from heaven. No sign from the ground. Just a man continuing to live after the act meant to end him had already entered his body. That was the second punishment of waiting. Nyra had prepared for action. She had not prepared for delay. The sleep root did not kill like a blade. It moved slowly. It needed warmth, time, circulation. It had to pass from stomach to blood, from blood to weakness, from weakness to fear. Until then, Garrick remained Garrick. He cursed a field hand for moving too slowly. He shoved a man aside near the mill path. He took the ledger from the foreman, pretended to read numbers he barely understood, then threw it back because authority did not require competence, only force. By midday, he drank again. This time shorter, careless, trusting the cup because he trusted the world that had protected him. Nyra carried a basket toward the kitchen yard. She passed close enough to see the liquid wet on the rim. She did not slow. Inside the kitchen, the cook asked her for salt pork from the rear shelf. Nyra reached for it, and for 1 second her fingers failed to close. The cook noticed. "You sick?" Nyra shook her head. "Heat." The cook stared at her for a moment, then turned away. Heat was an acceptable explanation. On Harrogate, It explained almost everything except the system that forced people to work through it. Outside, the day widened into full violence. The owner came down from the house near noon, irritated by the delay in production. He wore clean linen and stayed in the shade while asking why the carts had slowed. Garrick straightened when he saw him. Men like Garrick lived by transferring humiliation downward. If the owner questioned him, someone else would suffer for it before night. Nyra watched from the kitchen doorway. Garrick took another drink before answering. His hand remained steady. He spoke with the owner, pointed toward the cane road, blamed the drivers, the weather, the worn equipment, the people forced to work that equipment past reason. He blamed everyone except himself. The owner listened without interest. His concern was not pain, not death, not exhaustion. His concern was output. That was how sugar defended itself. Not with passion, with accounting. After the owner returned uphill, Garrick stood alone beside the mill. For the first time, his hand moved to his stomach. Nyra saw it, a small movement, almost nothing. Then he looked down at the cup, only for a second. He lifted it again and drank, as if irritation could overpower whatever had started inside him. The first true sign came shortly after. Garrick stopped mid-sentence while berating a man near the boiling shed. His mouth tightened. He leaned one hand against a barrel. The man he had been shouting at froze, unsure whether to step back or wait for another order. Garrick waved him away. "Move." The word came out weaker than usual. Nyra lowered her eyes. The poison was no longer an idea. It had become an event. Within half an hour, Garrick's face had lost color. Sweat gathered along his jaw, though he stood out of the worst heat. He crossed the yard toward the water trough, then changed direction, as if he had forgotten why he was moving. Twice he stopped. Twice he pressed his hand against his abdomen. The estate began to notice. Not with concern, with calculation. If Garrick was ill, who would give orders? If he was angry because he was ill, who would be blamed? If he fell, would the owner punish the nearest person for not catching him soon enough? Fear on Harrogate was practical. It always asked what consequence came next. A driver approached him. "Sir?" Garrick struck him weakly across the shoulder, more insult than injury. "Get back." Then his knees bent. He caught himself against the post where the cup hung. The same post. Nyra was carrying water across the yard when it happened. She did not stop. Stopping would be natural, but too much stillness can become evidence. She moved slower instead, as others began turning their heads. Garrick tried to climb the path toward the big house. He made it 6 steps. Then he dropped to one knee. The yard broke open. Men ran from the mill. The foreman shouted for help. One of the house servants sprinted uphill. The owner appeared on the veranda, then came down faster than dignity usually allowed. Garrick was on the ground by then, curled around the pane, breathing hard, unable to stand. No one knew whether to touch him. A man who spent years making others afraid does not become beloved when he falls. He becomes dangerous in a different way. The owner shouted for the doctor. There was no doctor on the estate, only a colonial physician in the nearby settlement who came when white men were sick and sent instructions when others were dying. A rider was sent. Until then, they carried Garrick into a side room of the big house and laid him on a narrow bed. Nyra did not enter. She stayed outside with the others, where she belonged in the estate's order. That distance protected her. It also made her listen harder. From the yard, she heard movement inside. Boots. A basin dropped. The owner's voice, low and sharp. Garrick groaning once, then again. Someone said bad liquor. Someone else said fever. The cook whispered that maybe the meat had turned. The foreman told her to shut her mouth. By late afternoon, Garrick could no longer speak clearly. The physician arrived near sunset with a leather case and annoyance on his face. Illness was an inconvenience when it interrupted a man of authority. He went inside, examined Garrick, asked what he had eaten, what he had drunk, where he had been, whether he had complained of fever before. The cup was brought in. Nyra saw it carried by the foreman. Her breath did not change. She had trained for that. but her body recognized the object like a witness entering court. The physician smelled it, touched the rim, looked inside. Then he set it aside. Not enough. Not yet. Night came before the verdict. Garrick Hove died inside the big house, in a room with shuttered windows, clean sheets, and men trying to name his death in a way that would not disturb the estate too deeply. The first explanation was useful fever. That explanation was useful. It blamed the land. It blamed the water. It blamed the water. It did not blame the people Garrick had spent years giving reasons to hate him. The owner accepted it quickly because accepting it protected him from questions. If Garrick had died of fever, Harrogate had suffered misfortune. If Garrick had been killed, Harrogate had lost control. Those were not the same thing. Nyra heard the news with the others in the yard. No one cheered. No one dared. A few looked down. A few crossed themselves. One woman turned away so fast her shoulder struck the wall behind her. Salome Ebo stood near the washhouse, face unreadable, hands locked together at her waist. Nyra saw her, then looked away. That night, the quarters were quieter than after Demba's death. Demba's death had been terror. Garrick's death was something more complicated. It opened a space no one trusted. Relief entered it, but slowly, like a person afraid of being seen. Nyra lay on her mat and stared into darkness. She had thought she would feel victory. She did not. She felt the exact weight of her hands. The hand that crushed the plant. The hand that opened the cup. The hand that closed it again. The hand that had once washed Demba's face after Garrick made his example. No law had moved. No court had spoken. No authority had admitted the crime that began this chain. The estate had created the silence, then forced its victims to decide what silence was worth. By morning, the official account was already forming. Garrick Hove, taken by sudden illness. Burial before the heat worsened. Work to resume. That might have ended it, if the physician had been as careless as the owner needed him to be. But near the rear steps of the big house, while the yard prepared for another day, Nyra saw the physician speak to the owner in a tone that made the man go still. The physician pointed once toward the room where Garrick's body lay, then toward the cup, then toward the stomach. The owner's face changed. Not grief, fear. Not fear for Garrick. Fear of what it meant if someone on Harrogate had found a way to kill an overseer without lifting a weapon. By noon, the cup was locked away. By evening, 2 men from the settlement had been sent for, and before the next sunrise, the word no one had dared say aloud began moving through the estate in whispers. Poison. The estate did not mourn Garrick Hove for long. It investigated him longer than it ever investigated Demba. That alone exposed the order of the world Harrogate served. A black man beaten to death in public could be reduced to a line of inconvenience. A white overseer found dead after drinking from his own cup became a threat to property, discipline, and the illusion that fear only moved in one direction. By mid-morning, the yard had changed. No one was allowed near the post by the mill. The metal cup had been taken. Garrick's quarters were locked. Men from the settlement arrived before noon. One thin, one broad, both armed, both carrying the confidence of people who believed their questions were already a form of punishment. The owner stood with them near the big house steps. His face was controlled, but his hands betrayed him. He kept rubbing his thumb across his knuckles, again and again. Garrick had not been loved, but he had been useful. His death had left a hole in the plantation's violence, and the owner wanted that hole sealed before anyone looked through it. The first searches began in the quarters. They did not search like men looking for truth. They searched like men looking for someone low enough to blame. Sleeping mats were kicked aside. Clay bowls were overturned. Bundles of cloth were pulled open. Walls were struck with knife handles. Packed earth was scraped with boot heels. Women were ordered to stand outside while strangers put their hands through the few things they owned. Nyra stood in line with the others, eyes lowered, breathing evenly. There was nothing beneath her mat. The vial was gone. The same night Garrick died, while the estate still argued over fever, Nyra had walked to the mangrove edge with the empty glass wrapped in cloth. She had broken it between 2 stones. Not in one place, That would have been careless. She had carried the pieces separately, pressing them into wet ground beneath roots, under stones, inside the black mud where crabs moved at night. She had rinsed the cloth until the water ran clear, then burned it in the kitchen fire before dawn. There was no bottle to find, no stained rag, no leaves, only her memory, and memory could not be taken from under a sleeping mat. Still, the search reached her place. The broad man crouched near her mat and dug into the earth with a short blade. The sound was small, dry, final. Nyra could hear each scrape. He lifted dirt, found nothing, dug deeper, found nothing again. The thin man watched her face instead of the floor. That was his trade. Not medicine, not law, pressure. He studied eyelids, throat movement, fingers, the small betrayals of terror. Nyra let her face remain tired. Grief was still useful. They expected grief from her. They expected fear. They expected emptiness. They did not expect calculation. The broad man stood. Nothing. The thin one did not answer. He looked at Nyra a moment longer, then moved to the next mat. That was the first test. It passed over her, but did not leave. The questions began after the searches. They called workers one by one to a storage room beside the big house. Not the front parlor, not a formal office. A storage room, hot and close, with sacks of meal stacked against the wall and one chair placed in the center. The chair was not kindness. It was a stage. Men came out shaken. Women came out silent. Some had been asked what Garrick ate. Some were asked who hated him. Some were asked who knew herbs. Some were asked who had been near the millpost. Every answer created another suspicion. That was the cruelty of investigation under slavery. Innocence had no protected shape. Standing near a place was suspicious. Staying away from it was suspicious. Silence was suspicious. Trembling was suspicious. Calm was suspicious. The owner wanted order restored, not justice served. If truth helped him, he would use truth. If a body helped him, he would use a body. Nyra understood this before they called her name. When they did, the yard went still in the way people go still when danger chooses a direction. 2 armed men came for her near the boiling house. She was carrying a bucket of water. One of them took it from her hand and set it down. Not gently, not violently, just with the efficiency of men who did not need permission. Nyra walked between them toward the storage room. She did not look at Salome, though she felt the woman's eyes on her from the wash-house yard. Inside, the room smelled of heat, dust, and old grain. The owner stood by the wall. The thin investigator leaned against a crate. The broad man stayed near the door. There was one chair. Nyra was told to sit. She sat. For a while, no one spoke. The silence was deliberate. They wanted her to fill it. Confession often begins when frightened people try to explain before they are accused. Nyra gave them nothing. The thin man started with ordinary questions. Where had she worked the day Garrick fell? Near the boiling house. Who saw her? Several people. Had she gone near the mill? Everyone went near the mill at some point. The yard was built around it. Had she touched Garrick's cup? No. The answer came clean. One word. No decoration. The thin man stepped closer. You know plants. Nyra looked down at her hands. I know kitchen herbs. You know roots, some. Which ones kill? She lifted her eyes then, not fast enough to seem offended, not slow enough to seem prepared. Many things kill here. The owner shifted against the wall. The thin man smiled slightly. It was not amusement. It was recognition that she had not answered the way he wanted. He circled once behind the chair. Your brother died recently. The room tightened. Nyra kept her hands still. Demba, he said. That was his name. She said nothing. Garrick punished him. No answer. He died after. The investigator let the sentence hang, as if the sequence itself were bait. Nyra heard the mill outside. The sound came through the wall, steady and indifferent. Same rollers, same labor, same estate. Demba was dead, Garrick was dead, and still the machine turned. The thin man leaned closer. That gives you cause. Nyra looked up. For the first time since entering the room, she looked directly at him. Cause? To want Garrick hove dead, the owner's eyes fixed on her. Nyra did not raise her voice. Everyone had cause. The broad man near the door moved slightly. Nyra continued before fear could stop her. Every person on this estate who heard his boots had cause. Every woman who avoided the washhouse after dark had cause. Every man he struck for standing too straight had cause. Every back he marked. Every mouth he silenced. If wanting him dead proves guilt, then you will have to question the whole plantation. No one spoke. It was the most dangerous thing she had said in years because it was not a lie. The thin man's face hardened. Truth spoken by the powerless becomes insolence when power has no answer for it. He changed tactics. He asked the same questions again in different shapes. Where exactly had she stood? Who stood beside her? How many times had Garrick drunk? Did she see the cup carried inside? Did she know anyone who had gone to the mangrove edge at night? Had Demba spoken of revenge? Had Demba known the women in the washhouse? That last question was not careless. Nyra felt it strike, but did not show it. I do not know. The investigator watched her. You do not know much. I know my work. That answer displeased him because it gave him nothing to seize. The questioning lasted until sweat ran down Nyra's back and soaked the waistband of her skirt. Her throat dried. Her legs began to ache from holding the same position. But exhaustion was not confession. Pain was not proof. At last, the owner made a small motion with his hand. Enough. Not because he believed her, because he had no evidence. Nyra was sent out. She walked back into the yard without stumbling. Only when she reached the shade behind the kitchen wall did her hand press once against the wood to steady herself. No one came to comfort her. Comfort could be mistaken for conspiracy. By evening, the investigation had begun to fail. They had suspicion. They had motive. They had the physician's doubts. They had a dead overseer and a plantation full of people who had suffered under him. What they did not have was proof. And proof, for once, had not been left where they could reach it. Days passed. The men from the settlement questioned more workers, searched the washhouse, opened storage bins, inspected cooking pots, and watched the water path. They found old herbs, kitchen scraps, medicine bundles, bits of charcoal, broken pottery, nothing that could carry the weight of an accusation. The estate grew tense, then tired. Fear cannot remain at its highest pitch forever. Work demanded bodies. Cane had to be cut. Sugar had to move. Profit pulled the investigation downward until it became another unfinished thing Harrogate would rather forget. Then, nearly 3 weeks after Garrick's death, Salome Ebo waited for Nyra near the path to the water barrels. She stood where the washhouse wall cast a narrow strip of shade. Her face was pale with decision. Nyra stopped. Salome looked once toward the yard, once toward the big house, then back at Nyra. Her voice was low. I saw what you poured into his cup. The words did not echo. They did not need to. Everything in Nyra's body went still. The searches, the questions, the buried glass, the steady breathing, the perfect answers. None of it had erased the one thing she had not known. There had been a witness. Nyra did not answer Salome at first. There was no safe answer. Denial would insult what Salome had seen. Confession would put a rope around her own throat. Silence was the only space left between those two deaths. The water path was narrow, packed hard by years of bare feet and forced routine. On one side stood the washhouse wall, stained by damp and ash. On the other side, barrels leaned under a rough roof. Beyond them, the yard continued as if nothing had happened. Men moved cane. Women carried linen. The mill turned. The world did not pause for a secret. Salome stepped closer, but not too close. I will not tell them, she said. Nyra kept her face still. That was what fear demanded. Not trust, not relief, only control. Salome looked toward the big house. The shutters were open. Someone inside laughed briefly, then stopped. The sound did not belong in the moment, but it belonged to Harrogate. The powerful could laugh above the same yard where others measured every breath. I saw you near the post, Salome said. That day, I had a bundle from the washhouse. I was behind the cart. You bent down. I saw your hand. I saw the cup. Nyra's fingers tightened around the rim of the water barrel. Salome noticed. "I said I will not tell. Why?" The word came out low. Salome's face changed then, not with pity, not with accusation, with something heavier. The look of a person bringing a buried thing into daylight and knowing daylight would not make it clean. "Because he should have died before your brother did." The sentence landed without drama. That made it worse. Nyra said nothing. Salome looked down at her own hands. Her knuckles were scarred from work, but the marks Nyra had once noticed were gone now. The body heals some evidence quickly. The mind does not. "The locked room," Salome said. Nyra's eyes moved to the washhouse door. Salome followed the look. I know Demba saw something. He saw enough." There was a shift in the air. Not mystery. Confirmation. Demba's death had been called a punishment for a broken mill. That lie had served everyone with authority. It had kept the owner's production intact. It had let Garrick turn murder into discipline. It had made the workers understand that even the reason for a killing could be stolen afterward. But Salome was now tearing that lie open. She spoke carefully, not because she lacked courage, but because some words had to be forced through years of being forbidden. Garrick had used the washhouse room after dark. He had called women there when the yard was empty and the other men pretended not to hear. Adult women. Workers from the laundry, the kitchen, the fields. He threatened them with punishment, sale, separation, and accusation. He made silence part of the labor. No one wrote it down. No one needed to. The estate was built so men like Garrick could commit private crimes under public protection. Salome had been one of them. She did not describe everything. She did not need to. The facts were enough. The room, the key, the nights, the threats, the women returning to work at dawn with their faces emptied out. The documentary record of Harrogate would never have included those details. That is the point. The archive of oppression is not only what was written, it is also what was deliberately made unspeakable. Nyra listened without moving. Inside her, the meaning of Garrick's death changed shape. She had killed him for Demba. That had been the truth she carried. A narrow truth, heavy enough by itself. But now Salome was placing other lives beside it. Other nights, other injuries, other silences. The act Nyra had believed was revenge had also ended a system of terror hidden behind one locked door. That did not make the killing clean. It made the world that required it more guilty. Salome wiped her face with the back of her hand, quick and hard, as if anger embarrassed her more than grief. "Demba followed him," she said. "Not once, more than once." Nyra's mouth tightened. "He told me to stop asking," Salome continued. "I told him he would get killed. He said someone had to know where Garrick went after dark." Nyra saw Demba again, standing by the kitchen wall, saying he had already followed him. She had thought he was reckless. Maybe he was. But recklessness was not the same as foolishness when every careful path led to the same cage. "He was going to speak?" Nyra asked. Salome shook her head. "Not to the owner. That mattered." Demba had not been naive enough to believe the owner would protect them. Men who profit from a locked room do not have to enter it to be responsible for what happens inside. The plantation owner had created the authority Garrick used. Whether he knew every detail was almost irrelevant. He had built a world where such details could thrive. "Then what was he doing?" Nyra asked. Salome looked again toward the yard, then lowered her voice. "He was preparing people to leave." Nyra felt the ground of the story shift beneath her. Not revenge, escape. Salome told her Demba had been speaking quietly with a man from the mangroves. Not often, not openly. Once near the Cane Road. Once by the old drainage trench. The man's name was Bio-Ren. He came from a free settlement hidden beyond the wet channels, a place the patrols searched for and failed to destroy because the mangroves swallowed maps made by men who did not know how to walk it. Demba had been collecting more than anger. He had been collecting roots. Nyra thought of the burial cloth, the stitches, the knots, the lines. She had kept it hidden since the funeral, folded beneath loose boards where Demba once stored tools. She had not dared to study it closely. Some grief is too sharp to touch, But now the cloth was no longer only his last possession. It was unfinished business. That night, Nyra waited until the quarters settled. She did not sleep. Salome did not either. They did not look at each other when they rose separately and left by different paths. Nyra reached the old mill shed first. The place smelled of oil, cane dust, and rusted iron. Demba had worked there so often that absence felt like another object in the room. She moved to the loose boards near the rear wall and lifted them carefully. The cloth was still there, folded, dry, undisturbed. She held it against her chest for one moment, not long enough to surrender to grief, only long enough to acknowledge the dead man whose hands had made it. Salome entered behind her. No greeting, no wasted words. Nyra spread the cloth across a workbench. Under lantern light, the marks looked different, not random, not decorative. There were 3 knots near one corner, then a stretch of plain seam, then 2 broken stitches. A darker thread ran diagonally across the middle. Loose loops gathered at the lower edge. Salome leaned over it. "What does it mean?" Nyra traced one line with her finger. "I do not know yet." But she did know something. Demba had not sewn like this by accident. Nyra turned the cloth once, then again. She stopped when the darker thread ran in the same direction as the drainage canal leading toward the mangrove edge. A route does not announce itself to the untrained eye. It waits for someone desperate enough to read it correctly. The 3 knots became the old cane stumps near the north field. The broken stitches became water crossings. The dark seam became the black channel, the place where the mud dropped deep and dogs lost scent. Nyra's breathing changed. Salome saw it. "You understand it, some of it. How much?" Enough to know he was not planning one person's escape. Outside, the estate slept uneasily under new authority. Garrick was dead, but Harrogate remained. The owner had already begun searching for a replacement. The mill still demanded bodies. The locked room still stood behind the washhouse, even if its key no longer hung from Garrick's belt. A dead overseer did not mean freedom. It meant a short gap before the next man arrived. Nyra looked at the cloth. Demba had known that. He had not prepared a memorial. He had prepared a door. Salome's voice was almost a whisper. "Can it still be used?" Nyra folded the cloth once, carefully. "It has to be." That was the moment the story changed again. Nyra had already crossed one line when she poisoned Garrick. She had done it alone, in secret, with death as the instrument. Now another line stood before her. This one required trust, movement, people. Risk that could not be buried in mud or hidden inside a cup. Revenge had been silent. Escape would make noise, and if it failed, Harrogate would not call it crime. It would call it example. The first problem was not the route, it was people. A map can be hidden under boards. A plan can be folded into cloth. But escape needs bodies, and bodies carry fear, loyalties, wounds, doubts, old promises, and the memory of every failed attempt that ended with someone dragged back before sunrise. Nyra understood that immediately. She and Salome could not simply gather names and whisper freedom into the quarters. Harrogate had trained people to survive by caution. Too much hope could look like a trap. Too much urgency could sound like betrayal. There were always ears near doorways. Always someone desperate enough to trade a rumor for a lighter punishment. Always someone too frightened to keep a secret even if they wanted to. So they chose slowly. Only adults. Only those with reason enough to risk death and discipline enough to obey silence. Salome knew the women from the washhouse. She knew who had suffered under Garrick, who had kept silent, who had been watching the locked room even after his death, as if cruelty might return wearing another man's face. Nyra knew the kitchen yard, the boiling house, the workers who moved near the mill without being watched too closely. Demba had known the field hands, but Demba was gone, and the dead leave unfinished judgments behind. They did not form a crowd. They formed a wound. 7 at first, then 9, then 12. Men and women past youth, old enough to know exactly what escape cost. No one was promised safety. No one was told the route was certain. Nyra refused to lie. Lies were the plantation's language. She would not carry that language into the mangroves. They met in pieces, 2 near the ash pit, 3 behind the cassava shed, 1 at the water barrels, 1 beside the broken cartwheel no one had repaired since the day Garrick fell. Each person was told only what they needed before the final night. A man named Kojo Ven, 41, who worked the cane carts, would loosen the east gate latch after the second watch. Mara Say, 38, from the boiling house, would spill molasses near the dog pens to delay the handlers. Tessima Roach, 44, who carried laundry to the big house, would find out whether the owner had invited patrolmen to sleep on the estate. Orrin Pike, 35, a co-opper with a damaged shoulder, would carry tools wrapped in cloth. A small blade, 2 hooks, a strip of iron, nothing large enough to look like a weapon if found. Every detail had a purpose. Escape was not a feeling. It was logistics under terror. Meanwhile, the estate prepared to replace Garrick. That made the plan urgent. The owner sent riders to nearby properties. He needed a man who could restore fear quickly. He did not say it that way. Men like him used words such as discipline, management, stability. But the meaning was plain. Since Garrick's death, the workers moved differently. Not freely, not openly, but with a fraction less collapse in the shoulders. The owner saw it and hated it. One evening, a stranger arrived at Harrogate wearing a dark coat despite the heat. He did not stay long. He inspected the yard, the mill, the quarters, the wash-house. He asked no questions of the workers. He looked at them as one might look over damaged tools before purchase. Nyra watched from the kitchen steps. Salome stood near the wash-house door, holding a basket of damp linen. Her face did not move, but Nyra saw her grip tighten. The stranger paused by the locked side room. The owner spoke to him quietly. The stranger nodded. That nod settled the matter. The room would not remain empty for long. That night, Nyra unfolded Demba's cloth again. Not for grief, for use. She and Salome studied it by touch more than sight. A lantern was too risky now. Nyra had marked the route in her mind. North field, drainage ditch, cane stumps, black channel, raised root path, dead cedar, deep mud, water crossing, mangrove cut. But one section remained uncertain. The dark seam crossed into a cluster of loose loops. It could mean low ground. It could mean to turn. It could mean danger. Demba had died before explaining it. That gap could kill them. They needed Bio-Ren. Contacting him was the most dangerous step yet. The mangrove settlement survived because it did not answer every call from the plantation. Runaways who trusted too quickly were captured. Guides who came too close vanished. Bio would not walk into Harrogate because 2 women wanted him to. He needed a sign Demba had arranged. Salome knew it. By the old drainage trench, she said. Demba left something once. What? A strip of red cloth tied under the bridge plank. He said if the man came again, he would see it. Nyra went before dawn. She carried kitchen ash in a bucket to make the errand look useful. Near the drainage trench, she moved slowly, waited for the cane road to empty, then crouched beneath the plank. The red cloth was gone. For a moment, that meant failure. Then she saw the replacement. 3 small cuts in the underside of the wood. Fresh. Not Demba's work. A reply. Bio had been there. Nyra pressed 2 fingers against the cuts, memorized their angle, and returned to the estate without looking back. The meeting happened 2 nights later at the edge of the old provision ground, where cassava rows gave way to wet brush. Bio-Ren stepped out of the dark without sound. He was not dressed like a legend. He was dressed like a man who had survived by refusing to be seen. Dark shirt, cut trousers, a knife at his side, feet wrapped for mud. Scars marked one side of his face and disappeared under his collar. His eyes moved constantly. Nyra did not ask where he came from. He did not ask if she was afraid. Salome stood half a step behind her, listening to the yard in the distance. Nyra unfolded the burial cloth just enough for Bio to see the stitches. His expression changed when he recognized Demba's work. "He finished more than I thought," Bio said. "He died before he could tell us the last part." Bio touched the dark seam, then the loose loops. "This is not a path," he said. "It is a warning." Nyra waited. "The ground there looks firm. It is not." You step straight through it. You sink to the waist. Dogs can cross if handlers go around. People cannot cross in a line. Then why mark it? Because patrolmen use that side when they think they are clever. The cloth was not only a map to freedom, it was also a map of traps. Demba had not planned to outrun Harrogate by speed. He had planned to make the estate chase into its own ignorance. Bio laid out the route in short, controlled phrases. No speeches, no promises. Move after the second watch. Stay low through the north field. Do not cross the canal at the broken bridge. Use the water 50 paces west, where the mud holds under roots. Step only where the person ahead steps. If the dogs come close, break into 2 groups for the length of one channel, then join again at the dead cedar. If anyone panicked and ran alone, they were lost. If anyone shouted, they were all exposed. If anyone turned back, the route died with them. Nyra repeated every instruction. Bio watched her. You lead them from the yard, he said. I lead them once they reach the water. Nyra looked at the dark line of trees beyond the provision ground. I have never led anyone. Bio's answer was flat. You already killed the man they feared most. Do not pretend you have not crossed into leadership. Nyra did not like the words, not because they were false, because they made the act too clean. Killing Garrick had not made her brave. It had made her responsible for what came after. The final day arrived with heavy heat and no rain. That was bad. Rain would have helped. Rain confuses scent, covers sound, empties yards. Dry weather keeps tracks clear and dogs sharp. Nyra adjusted. She took Garrick's old cup. It had been locked away after the investigation, then moved to a storage shelf once the estate lost interest. Men who feared evidence often become careless once they believe danger has passed. Tessima had seen where it was kept. Orn had lifted the latch. Nyra took it before dawn and wrapped it in cloth. The cup would become a false witness. In the kitchen yard, she rubbed the rim with cane liquor, sweat-soaked cloth, and bitter herbs from the drainage edge. Not poison this time, scent. Strong enough to confuse dogs if placed near the mill and dragged toward the wrong path. The same object Garrick had used as a symbol of control would now mislead the men sent to restore it. There was no justice in that, only function. After sunset, Harrogate tightened into night. The owner's house dimmed. The watch changed. The dogs shifted in their pens. The new overseer had not yet arrived, but his shadow already stood over the estate. Everyone in the escape group worked through the evening as if nothing waited beneath their skin. Nyra passed Salome once near the wash house. No words, only a glance. Kojo moved toward the east gate. Mara carried the molasses. Orn adjusted the cloth bundle under his arm. Bio waited somewhere beyond the dark. Nyra hid Demba's burial cloth under her dress and took Garrick's cup in her hand. The bell for second watch sounded. One low strike, then another. The hour had come, and this time, Nyra was not walking toward revenge. She was walking toward the kind of freedom that either opens once or closes forever. The second watch bell faded into the dark. No one moved for 3 breaths. That pause mattered. It separated planning from consequence. Before it, escape was still something held in the mind, something folded into cloth, whispered beside barrels, measured in routes and signals. After it, every step could be punished. Nyra left the kitchen yard first. She did not run. Running inside the estate would draw the eye before the gate even opened. She crossed with an empty basket on her hip and Garrick's metal cup hidden beneath a strip of cloth. The yard was not silent. Plantations never slept cleanly. A chain shifted near the mule shed. A dog scratched at wood. Someone coughed in the quarters. From the big house came the dull sound of a door closing. Near the millpost, Nyra stopped. This was where Garrick had drunk. This was where he had fallen. This was where the estate had first learned that fear could travel upward. She set the cup near the post, turned it once in the dirt, then dragged the liquor-soaked cloth across the ground toward the mill shed. Not far, just enough to make the dogs argue with the truth. Then she left the cloth beneath a stack of cane waste. The cup remained visible, a false relic, a dead man still doing harm to his own side. At the east gate, Kojo Ven had already loosened the latch. He stood with his back to the fence, hands empty, body still. To anyone passing, he was only a worker waiting for orders, but his left foot pointed toward the opening. That was the signal. One by one, the others came. Salome from the wash house, Mara from the boiling yard, Oren with the wrapped tools, Tessima carrying nothing but a small water gourd, 3 field hands who had said almost no words during the planning, a co-op's widow with a scar across one wrist, 12 adults in total, each old enough to understand that freedom was not being given. It had to be stolen from a system that had stolen everything first. Nyra counted them without moving her lips. No one missing. No one extra. That was important. An extra person could be courage. It could also be disaster. Kojo lifted the latch. The gate opened with a soft wooden complaint. Everyone froze. No shout followed. Nyra stepped through first because someone had to make the opening real. Behind her, the others passed into the narrow strip between fence and cane. The gate closed. Harrogate remained behind them, but not far enough to become memory. They moved low through the north field. Cane leaves cut at their arms and faces. No one cursed. No one stopped. The burial cloth pressed against Nyra's body beneath her dress, warm from her skin. Demba's stitches were not in her hand now. They were in her head. 3 knots. Old cane stumps. Turn. She raised her hand once. The line shifted left. Behind them, the estate continued in darkness. Ahead, the mangrove waited black and dense, not welcoming, not cruel, simply indifferent. That was more mercy than Harrogate had ever offered. They reached the drainage ditch without being seen. Then a dog barked. Not close. Not yet. The line tightened. Nyra turned her head sharply, not to look back, but to listen. 1 bark became 2. Then a man's voice near the pens. Then another. Mara's molasses had delayed them, but not stopped them. Delay was all they had ever expected. They crossed the ditch at the place Bayo had marked. Not the broken bridge. 50 paces west. Roots under mud. 1 foot placed where the last foot had pressed. Oren slipped once, caught himself, and kept moving. No one helped unless necessary. Help could slow the whole line. Then bells rang behind them. Harsh, repeated. Not the watch bell. Alarm. Harrogate had discovered the absence. The estate that ignored suffering could detect missing labor with astonishing speed. Men shouted. A gate slammed. Dogs answered fully now, hard and high, released into the yard with handlers cursing behind them. Nyra did not speed up. Speed kills in mangrove ground. Panic leaves tracks. Demba had known that. Bayo had confirmed it. The route was not built for flight. It was built for discipline. At the edge of the first channel, Bayo appeared. No greeting, no questions. This way. His voice was low, almost flat. He counted them with his eyes, then moved into the water. The first crossing reached their knees, then thighs. The mud pulled at their legs like hands. Tessima almost fell. Salome caught her elbow and let go as soon as she was steady. The dogs were louder now, but confused. They had reached the mill yard. Men shouted around the post. The cup had worked. For a few minutes, Garrick Hove's old scent dragged the hunt in circles around the place where he once ruled. Then one handler understood enough to redirect them. The dogs turned east. Bayo heard it before Nyra did. "Faster now," he said. Not careless. They moved through water, root, and black mud. The mangrove closed around them. Branches forced them low. Thorns caught cloth. Mosquitoes swarmed their faces. No one spoke. Breathing became the only sound they owned. At the dead cedar, the group split. Not from panic. From design. 6 moved with Bayo through the shallow channel. 6 followed Nyra across raised roots. The dogs reached the place where the scent divided and lost certainty. Handlers shouted. One dog plunged toward the false line and sank to its chest in mud. Men cursed and pulled it back. The swamp did not care about authority. It punished ignorance the same in every uniform. Nyra's group crawled beneath a fallen trunk. Oren's wrapped tools caught on bark. He stopped to pull them free. A shout came from behind, closer than before. For 1 second, he looked ready to abandon the tools. Nyra shook her head. They would need them. He freed the bundle. They moved. The two groups met again beyond the Black Channel, exactly where Bio had said they would if no one broke. Salome was breathing hard. Kojo had blood on his cheek from a branch. Mara was limping but still upright. No one was gone. That fact almost broke Nyra more than fear had. They kept moving until the sky began to pale. By then the dogs had faded behind them. Not disappeared, but weakened by water, wrong turns, and men who did not know the ground. The pursuers still had weapons. They still had horses where land allowed. They still had law on their side. But the mangrove had taken away their certainty. Near sunrise, Bio led the group onto firmer ground hidden behind a screen of thick trees. Smoke rose somewhere ahead, thin and controlled. Not plantation smoke, cooking smoke. The settlement did not reveal itself all at once. First came a lookout with a musket, then another, then a woman with gray hair and a knife in her belt. She looked at Bayo, then at the 12, then at Nyra. Any followed? Bayo listened to the morning. Not through. Only then were they allowed forward. The maroon settlement was not paradise. That would be a lie. It was hard ground, hidden labor, constant vigilance, sickness fought with roots and skill, food earned by work, safety never guaranteed. But no overseer stood above the yard. No locked washhouse room waited for night. No metal cup marked one man's right to terrorize everyone near him. For the first time in years, Nyra saw people moving without waiting for a command. That sight did not make her weep. It made her understand how much had been stolen. Later that morning, when the sun rose fully over Harrogate, the searchers found Demba's burial cloth. It hung from a mangrove branch near the edge of the false crossing, where the pursuers had turned wrong. Rain and swamp water had washed it clean in places. The stitches remained. The owner did not understand what he was looking at. That was fitting. He had never understood Demba alive. He would not understand him dead. Years passed. Nyra did not become the kind of woman people could simplify. She did not allow them to turn her into a clean symbol. In the settlement, she worked as a healer, using the knowledge once sharpened into poison to bring down fever, close wounds, and steady the dying. She helped plan other escapes. She taught people how to read ground, scent, weather, and silence. But she never pretended the cup was light in her memory. Some nights, she saw Garrick reaching for it. Some nights, she saw Demba's hand twitch before dawn. Some nights, she heard Salome say she had seen everything, and felt again the terror of being known. Freedom did not erase consequence. It gave consequence a place to breathe. When Nyra was older, a woman in the settlement asked whether the story was true, whether she had killed the overseer, whether that made her a hero. Nyra sat for a long time before answering. "I did not do it because I was brave," she said. "I did it because that world left no clean road to justice. That is the part history often tries to avoid. It wants victims who suffer quietly or heroes who act without stain. Nyra was neither. She was a woman cornered by a system that protected the violent, erased the dead, and called obedience peace. She chose a terrible answer because every lawful answer had been denied to her first. And after that choice, she did not stop at revenge. She followed the map. She carried the living out. If this story stayed with you, subscribe before you leave, and comment where you're watching from. Your city, your country, your corner of the world. I also want to hear your theory. Did Nyra's act make her a killer, a liberator, or something history has never had the courage to name? Write your answer below, because the most dangerous stories are the ones people tried to bury. And tonight, we opened one.